Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is here. I saw it, so these are my thoughts. I'm going to keep things spoiler free for a few minutes, and then I'll give you plenty of warning before diving into specific story beats. The short version is that I liked it. I didn't love it. I basically walked out of the theater just nodding my head, like, yeah, that was good and enjoyable and fun the entire way through. It didn't lift me emotionally the same way Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade do, but I wasn't expecting that either. I went in hoping for a fun, globe-trotting, treasure-hunting adventure, and that is exactly what I got. I recently put out a video of my favorite tropes in every Indiana Jones film, and Dial of Destiny checks most of them. I felt satisfied, but the fifth and final Indy movie didn't change my life the same way the originals did, which again is fine. I think it would have been unrealistic for me to expect that. Even so, I think I would rank this one as my third favorite of the five. I don't hate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but I also don't like it. It's just kind of there. And I didn't grow up loving Temple of Doom because I didn't grow up watching it. I wasn't allowed to when I was younger because it was the dark and violent one, even though I was allowed to see someone's face melt off in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Again, this is my initial reaction, and there might be some recency bias, but I feel like Dial lands very firmly in the middle for me. The primary artifact or MacGuffin or whatever you want to call it is the Antikythera mechanism, or Archimedes style. I thought it was a great choice, and having done some very surface level research on the real thing, I was impressed with how well they were able to blend fact with fiction like indie movies tend to do. But it's also the perfect artifact for a movie all about age and legacy and regret. All the main characters are good. Phoebe Waller-Bridge's Helena Shaw is a new kind of indie sidekick while also feeling familiar. She fits in the universe. In many ways, she reminds me of how Indy was in Temple of Doom, seeking fortune and glory above all else. It's interesting to see someone very clearly not interested in helping Indy from the start. Elsa at least pretended to be on his side, but Helena is this antagonistic ally that's very fun to watch. Mads Mikkelsen as Jürgen Voller is great. As a villain, I would place him right alongside Belloc and Donovan. Again, he just feels like he fits in this world that's half grounded in history and yet still half fantasy. I've said it many times before, but having him be involved in the space program like Werner von Braun was a brilliant way to bring Nazis into this story. I also like that he's a physicist because he is smart, but not in the way that Indy or Helena are, and that leads to his downfall in a cool way. And of course, Harrison Ford does a great job as the aging Indiana Jones. It's always wonderful to see him with the hat and the whip. I like that the film not only doesn't pretend Indy isn't old, but also makes it central to the story and its themes. I know some fans always want their heroes to seem like they're always at their peak, but Indiana Jones is a character who is constantly taking 2 steps forward and then 1 or 2 or 3 steps back. He gets the MacGuffin, he loses it, he gets it back, he loses it again, he gets punched and shot, and he fails quite a bit, but he never gives up. At the start of the movie, he's been knocked down in a big way. I don't consider myself old, but I am nearing my late 30s. There have been a rough couple years as of late. The older I get, the more value I see in a film where the heroes I grew up admiring are also experiencing hardship and are then able to shake it off. And Indiana Jones, of all people, knows what it's like to stand back up after taking some hits. But I should also talk about the prologue of the film, set near the end of World War II, where we do get to see Indy in his prime one last time. I've heard a lot of people praising the first 20 minutes, and they truly are a blast, but I don't think it's the best part, as some have said. I think James Mangold wanted to make sure we did get to see some classic, younger Indiana Jones action, which I am grateful for, but it's also so jam-packed full of CGI that it didn't quite feel like classic Indy. I think the de-aging is the best it's ever looked, and yet there's still something about it that feels a little off, not just in the face, but in the delivery of lines. There were moments where Indy would say something and it felt stilted. There was a lack of emotion. I don't know if they generated Indy's younger voice like ILM did with Luke Skywalker in the Book of Boba Fett, but that's what it reminded me of. Some flat line delivery gave me pause. There were also some occasional moments in action set pieces throughout the movie that were obviously CG, but there was a moment of Indy running on the roof of a train in the prologue that just didn't look great. And in a franchise that made its mark in the 80s before the advent of computer graphics, when they really did have people running on trains, I felt myself longing for that. But on the flip side, there are plenty of other action scenes that did seem to call back to that style of filmmaking. I'm sure they were enhanced by computer graphics, but in less notable noticeable ways. The chases through New York and Tangier were thrilling and felt far more dangerous. I liked Mangold's direction. I admit I usually don't pick up on stuff like blocking or the more technical side of directing upon my first watch. That's something I'll look for more in future watches, but I do remember on multiple occasions thinking, now that's an Indiana Jones shot. The script was pretty good. I think as a whole, it was a little long. It could have been shorter, but I also thought it was well paced. I never felt like things were dragging. Just like Raiders, it feels like there are very clearly defined chapters, as if this were several episodes of an old serial combined into one. The story moves confidently towards its third act and builds to the climax in some very clever ways. I can see the ending being potentially divisive for some. Indiana Jones films always veer into the supernatural at the end. The crazier parts of Dial of Destiny worked for me and felt completely wild and pulpy in ways that I enjoyed. I do think there were maybe too many characters. Quite a few people enter and exit the story rather quickly, and there are some things that happened that I feel like weren't fully resolved, but nothing that ruined my fun or overall experience. At the end of the day, this movie was fun, which is exactly what I wanted it to be. I walked out feeling satisfied. I expect as I sit with it and whenever I see it again, I will continue to enjoy it even more. But for now, I feel happy and content. If you're an Indiana Jones fan, go see it. I bet you'll like it a lot. If you've already seen it, stick around because now I'm gonna dive into spoilers and story specifics, and at the end of the video, I'm gonna run through the silly Indiana Jones report card I made for a recent video. Okay, if you're still here, I'm gonna jump straight into the third and final act in Sicily. 2,000 years ago. People have been speculating that time travel might be part of this film for years. I had lots of discussions with friends who were worried about it, which I get. Time travel can be a dicey thing to throw into any story, and especially a big franchise, but I was optimistic, because faces usually only melt at the end of an Indiana Jones movie, so I assumed things would only get weird in the final act. I'm so glad that was the case. I definitely found myself leaning in as Waller's plane traveled to the eye of the storm, excited to see what would come next. I thought it was fun having two planes taking part in a huge, ancient battle, and thought the foreshadowing throughout the film was great. The dragon fighting the Centurion in the marionette show, the Phoenix with propellers in Archimedes' tomb, that's some fun stuff. If I'm understanding things correctly, Archimedes built the dial with the sole purpose of bringing people back to his specific time. I think Helena said something along those lines, which is fitting, because she was playing that card game earlier, which was all about offering the illusion of choice. The dial is this tempting tool that offers you the illusion of going back to fix past mistakes, but you can't. What happened to you happened. It is a part of your history and it cannot be changed. That's also foreshadowed when Indy finds Waller's watch in the tomb. I love that Indy realizes that truth as they are flying towards the fissure. He figures it out because he knows his history. Waller doesn't. I pointed out earlier that Waller is smart, but he's a physicist, not a historian. He thinks his calculations are all he needs to conquer the universe. As he said, he first conquered space and now he wants to conquer time, history itself. He seeks to control this thing he doesn't even understand, and it leads to his downfall. I prefer my Indy villain deaths to be more supernaturally insane, but I do still like that he simply dies knowing he was defeated. You can see the failure on his face on the plane before it crashes, and I liked that. Kleber, on the other hand, I would not have minded a worse death for him, because I get the sense he was an American that decided to become a Nazi, and he was a monster throughout the movie. Something I didn't like about Dial was all the civilian death, shooting the teachers, the cab driver, the diving crew, Ronaldo, the innocent man at the ruins. Indie movies are violent, don't get me wrong, but usually not towards random bystanders, so I was hoping Kleber would meet a rougher end, even if he were one of the dudes impaled by the Romans. But I digress. Back to Indy, let's talk about where he ends this film. I was so worried he was going to stay behind in ancient times, and I am so glad Helena did not accept that. In every single Indiana Jones movie, Indy learns that human connection is more important than whatever he's been seeking the entire story. It's Marion over the Ark, it's the village over fortune and glory, his father over the Grail, his son over the Crystal Skull. If he accepted the power of the artifact in his final adventure, I would not have liked it. But I understand his struggle, because we learned that Mutt died in the war and Marion left him. If I could nitpick for a moment, I definitely noted that it's nearly identical to Han and Leia's status in The Force Awakens. They lost their son and separated in grief. I wish those two stories had diverged a bit, but it makes sense for Dial of Destiny, and I'm glad Mutt wasn't just completely left out. So Indy is in a sad spot, and he is tempted to take some false noble way out of his problems, but really I think he just wants to take the easy way out because he doesn't want to return to a time where he feels like he has no one. The whole world is looking to the future and not at the past. Meanwhile, he is stuck in the past with what happened, regretting the people he lost, and he's completely oblivious to the fact that someone is arguing for him in that very moment. Helena wants him in her life. I do think I wish Indy had come to the decision to return himself instead of Helena having to knock him unconscious, to reject the temptation when it's at its strongest, to realize he can pick himself up and be there for Marion while he's staring Archimedes in the face. But ultimately, I still felt everything I needed to feel back in his apartment when Marion walked through the door. Their final scenes together instantly made me tear up. It's crazy how much that character means to me, and I'm so glad that, unlike Han and Leia, the two of them got a happy ending together. I think repeat viewings will deepen my understanding of all the story elements and themes, but off of just my first time seeing it, I already like what was done. I'm running out of stuff to talk about before I get to Dial's grade as an indie movie, but I do have a few more moments that I want to bring up. The diving sequence was great. It's something we haven't seen in an indie movie before. The shipwreck, the skeletons, the eels. I loved the eels. A friend and I were discussing what the new creepy crawly would be in this movie, and we came up blank. Going underwater was a simple idea I didn't even consider. The eels were great fun. The scene afterwards on the boat with Helena deciphering the ancient clues for Valor was fantastic. The reveal of the dynamite in her pocket and the request for the cigarette, that moment was intense. I like that the CIA agent is kind of a stand-in for Americans who thought they could work with Nazis without consequence. Actively teaming up with evil people and naively thinking you can control them never works out, and every single character that works with Nazis in the franchise winds up dead. I haven't mentioned Teddy yet, but I liked him. There was a fun generational dynamic where Indy can probably see himself in Helena. She's like he was when he was young, and she even has her own sidekick that she met similar to how Indy met Short Round. But he is also cold-blooded because the way he wound up being the one to dispatch Hawk, the giant henchman, handcuffing him to a grate to drown. Not saying he didn't deserve that, but wow, Teddy. And shout out to Teddy's pilot buddy that woke up in the middle of the adventure. Poor guy was just taking a nap and then he woke up traveling through a time portal to ancient Sicily. Nobody is gonna believe that poor man. I kinda wished he were in Indy's apartment at the end too, just hanging out, and Indy has no idea who he is. He did help save all their lives, and he's seen some unbelievable stuff. He deserves to be part of the family now. Recently, some commenters asked me who my favorite Indiana Jones side or background character is. I think it might be this guy now. For some stuff I didn't like, I think Helena's fiancé could have been someone different. He felt like the kind of character that might pop up again to accidentally cause chaos for everyone near the end of the movie, but that whole group went nowhere. I'm also confused about Indy being framed for murder. That felt like it was never resolved. He's just back in New York, no problem, but like, how are they gonna prove his innocence? I guess Helena is a witness? Maybe I missed some dialogue on the radio or something explaining all that away. But okay, I think I've said enough about Dial of Destiny as a movie. To reiterate, my overall review is that I liked it. I didn't love it, but I look forward to seeing it again. Now let's get silly and grade it based on the report card I made for yesterday's video. How does it handle my favorite 10 Indiana Jones tropes compared to the other 4 films? First, the logo fade from the Paramount Mountain into a real mountain or molehill or something. I was shocked we didn't get that in this movie. I want to make it clear that doesn't really bother me at all. I was just laughing to myself as it started. I thought the Disney castle would fade into the movie, and it didn't. Then we saw the Paramount logo, and I was like, oh, they are going to do the mountain. And then they didn't. And then we saw the Lucasfilm logo, and I was like, oh, how are they going to fade this into something? And they didn't. So Dial of Destiny is off to a rough start on the trope report card. But how about the prologue? I'm going to rank it 4th out of 5. I like the authenticity of the original trilogy prologues and the fact that they are all largely unrelated to the rest of their respective movies. Dial is very much related to the rest of the story, and it's a little long, but I did enjoy it all. Next up, how is our look at Indy's normal life? Once again, it moves up the rankings to third because we spend quite a bit of time there, which is important to do. Indy is in a different state than we've ever seen him. We still get time at the college and we see how times have changed around him, but I still prefer the moments we get in Raiders and Crusade. How does it stack up as a globe-trotting adventure? We've got somewhere in Europe for the prologue, America, Morocco, Greece, and Italy, which is pretty good. I'll say I was scared for a moment when they didn't show the map with the red line from America to Morocco, but that was for story purposes, and it came back a couple times later. I'm actually going to rank this one second because I think it had a wider variety of locations than most indie movies. Next up is puzzle solving. There's a decent amount going on, and I really loved the riddle leading to Archimedes' tomb, and then its eventual discovery with the water puzzle, but it still can't touch Crusade or Raiders, so it's going third. Now let's talk about the creepy crawlies. Like I said, I really liked the eels. I thought it was a creative choice, but also, I'd still hate to be surrounded by bugs the most. But I think I'd rather be on my feet in a room of snakes or rats or ants than stuck in water surrounded by eels. This is completely based on my own personal fears, but I have to rank this one second. Next up is the Pat Roach-style henchman. I liked Hawk's terrifying presence throughout the movie, but Indy never had to face him like he did the German mechanic or characters like him, which makes sense. Indy was not going to win that fight, but I thought Indy might take him out through some other means. I was still surprised and shocked by his death, like I mentioned, and I do think that should be taken into consideration. It isn't as shocking as being chopped up by a propeller or squished by a rock crusher, but it also didn't seem pleasant, so I'm gonna place it fourth. Next up, let's talk car or other vehicle chases. I still have to give the top spot to Crusade because that movie has damn near every mode of transportation in it, but Dial does have an exciting horse and motorcycle chase through New York, the chase in Tangier is a lot of fun, and the plane chase through time is cool. They're all fun and varied sequences, but I do still prefer my chases from the 80s, so I'm placing it fourth. Moving into the supernatural death for the villain, this is an interesting one. Like I said, I do like Voller's death, I think it's fitting. It is supernatural adjacent because time travel, but it doesn't feel as extreme as Belloc's head exploding or Donovan's rapid aging. I still like it more than Spalko or Mola Ram's deaths though. And finally, our last trope is the lesson Indy learns at the expense of what he's been chasing. I talked at length about this already, I'm gonna place it third. If Indy had actively made the choice not to stay with Archimedes, I might have ranked it higher, but he didn't, so I won't. And that brings Dial of Destiny's completely subjective, goofy, and made-up score to a 27, putting it in third place, just barely eking out Temple of Doom for me. That does sound about right in my head. But where would you place Dial in your rankings? What did you think of the movie? Let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, which will be back to our normal Star Wars programming next week, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and remember, it's not the years, it's the mileage.